Today we're talking about curriculum. You might ask why in a class about observation and assessment, why do we need to know about curriculum? The reason why we need to know about curriculum is that they are directly connected. When you observe children and assess what they are learning, you have to assess what you have planned in the curriculum. So today I've asked you to open up the template that is for your year-long theme and your sub-themes. And the reason that we start there is because that's where curriculum planning begins. We begin with a theme because when we use a theme, it connects learning for children. And we know from research that that helps children retain information. So we begin with a theme. Now I've asked you to choose a year-long theme. I know you're used to choosing themes such as animals or farm animals or simple things like seasons and that sort of thing. I'm asking you to choose a year-long theme. So for an example, I've chosen a theme and I've posted it online, and I'm going to talk about that theme as an example. My theme that I chose is things that change. And so all year long, I'm going to talk about things that change. But each month, I have a different unit about things that change. So you're going to choose a big long theme, and you may not choose seasons and you may not choose holidays. Seasons and holidays can be used as a sub-theme, but you may not choose them as your year-long theme. An example of a year-long theme might be living things, or all types of animals, or the ocean, or America, or my world, time, books alive, or multiple intelligences. All of those are giant themes that you can connect other themes to. So for example, if you did books alive, you might talk about fairy tales in one month, or nursery rhymes in another month, or narrative stories in another month, or real books in another month. Or if you chose living things, you might talk about plants in one month, and you might talk about plants of the rainforest, or then you might talk about bugs, and you might talk about humans. So you can break it up in lots of different ways. So in my theme about change, I chose different sub-themes for each month. So in January, I talked about the theme of winter. Seasons change into winter. In February, I talked about weather because weather changes. In March, I talked about families because families change. In April, we talked about spring. And in May, we talked about plants, how they grow and change. In June, we talked about summer. In July, we talked about time and how it changes from days of old. In August, we talked about time and how it changes into the future. In September, we talked about changes in our school and our classes and our grades. In October, we talked about autumn changes. In November, we talked about changes of the homes in which we live in. In December, we talked about us and how we grow and change. So you see how each one is connected to change, and it makes connections for the children all year long. Now, after you've filled in your year-long change and your month-long change, I want you to go and take your learning continuum. And in your learning continuum, you'll see that there are 4 domains. And those domains are the social-emotional domain, the physical domain, the cognitive domain, and the language domain. And in each one of those domains, I want you to, there are 50 altogether. They're not an even number, some are less, some are more, but I want you to choose from each domain something to work on in each month as it might relate to your theme and your sub-theme. So for example, I've chosen things that change for my year-long theme. And in my January theme, I've chosen seasons that change into winter. So for my social emotional domain, I've chosen demonstrate self-direction and independence. And the reason I chose that is because in January, children are having to put on their coats and gloves and that sort of thing. And so that's a way that I can observe them and assess that they can demonstrate self-direction and independence. I chose the physical domain, control small muscles and hands. That goes right along with the first one. If they are able to remember to put on their coat and prepare themselves properly for outside weather, then they're having to use their small muscles in their hands to be able to button their coats and pull on their boots. That's a way that I can assess their small muscles in their hand development. And for cognitive, I said observes objects with curiosity. If you're lucky enough to have snow or weather changes, or you can look at ice and how it melts, that's another way that you can observe children looking at objects with curiosity. And then last I said demonstrates an understanding of print concepts. So that would be a good time to introduce books and the parts of a book, and understanding that words come from books and information comes from books. I also added a fifth one to that, and I said participates in conversations. So we can have conversations about winter and how winter changes, things about change and winter. So this week you're going to fill in the main theme, the big one that covers year long. Then you're going to fill in the 12 sub-themes, one for each month. And then there are 5 spaces. Remember, there are 4 domains, but there's 5 spaces. You need to make sure in your learning continuum that all 50 of those learning continuum goals are covered somewhere in the year. That way, when you're assessing children, you'll be sure that you assess the whole child and not just random pieces.